I was there the night it began, and I have told this story perhaps 40 times since, to the Duke's steward, to Lady Vane's 3 sisters, to the old solicitor who drafted the settlement papers and could not stop laughing, and every time I tell it, I begin in the same place, a coaching inn on the Dorset road, a storm that had no intention of stopping, and a girl who brought a plate of cold mutton to a man she had never met and asked him absolutely nothing. My name is Callum Prest. I have been private secretary to Edmund Vane, Duke of Ravenwood, for 11 years. I have managed his correspondence, smoothed over his parliamentary silences, and twice talked him out of a duel. I know the Duke as well as any man alive, which means I know that he is not a man given to sentiment, or impulsiveness, or, as he would say, unnecessary conversation. I am telling you this so that what follows makes sense in context. Or rather, so that it makes no sense at all, which is closer to the truth. It was the 3rd week of November. We were traveling back from a conference in Exeter, the Duke refusing the ducal carriage on the grounds that a plain hired coach drew less attention and allowed him to think, and a storm came in off the channel with the kind of enthusiasm that suggests it had been saving itself. By 7 in the evening the road was soup. By 8 our driver had stopped at the Crow and Lantern in the village of Fenwick Cross and informed us, with great apology and greater finality, that we were not moving until morning. The inn was not a grand establishment. The common room smelled of tallow and wet dog. The landlord, a Mr. Briggs, looked at the 2 of us, plain coats, no livery, no crest on the coach, and gave us the table nearest the draught, which I understood to be a judgment. The kitchen, he said, had closed. There was cold food if we wanted it, and if we didn't, the bread was still fresh from this morning. Edmund, the Duke, I call him Edmund in memory because that is what this story requires, sat down without complaint and opened the letter he had been reading in the coach. He does that in uncomfortable rooms. He finds the room less uncomfortable when he has something to attend to. I went to find the landlord about the bread, and that is when I first saw her. She came out of the kitchen door with a candle in one hand and a cloth in the other, wiping flour from her wrist. She was perhaps 23, perhaps a little older, with dark hair pinned back practically and an expression that suggested she had been on her feet since before light and expected to be on them several hours more. She was not beautiful in the way the tongue uses the word. She was something more useful than that. She was a woman who looked at a problem and simply solved it. She looked past me to the table where Edmund sat reading in a cold draught, and she turned back to the kitchen without a word. 2 minutes later she came out with a plate. Cold mutton, bread, a wedge of hard cheese, a candle of her own, and she set it at Edmund's elbow without interrupting him, without announcing herself, without waiting to be thanked. She simply placed it where he could reach it and stepped back. Edmund looked up. She met his eyes once, briefly, practically, and said, "The kitchen is closed, but the mutton is good and the bread is from this morning. I'll bring you something hot if the fire comes back up." Then she turned and went back to clearing the other tables. He watched her go. I noted this, because Edmund does not, as a rule, watch people go. He ate the mutton. He did not return to his letter. An hour later, when the fire had indeed come back up, she brought him a bowl of soup without being asked. She set it down, met his eyes again in that same brief practical way, and said, "It's leek, not beef." The beef went at midday. And then she was gone again. There was one incident before we retired. One of the local men, 3 Alish past cents, lurched across the room and caught the edge of her tray. She stumbled. It was Edmund who rose, not me, though I was closer, crossed the room in 3 steps, and caught her elbow before the tray went over. The touch lasted half a second. She recovered her balance, steadied the tray, and looked at him directly. "Thank you," she said. Plain and complete. Then to the drunk, "Outside, please, Mr. Hatch. I'll have your horse brought round." And the man, somehow, went. Edmund stood in the middle of the common room for a moment after that, looking at the door she had disappeared through, and then he came back and sat down. He did not open his letter again that night. In the morning the road had cleared and our driver had us moving by 7. I looked for her to say goodbye, habit, gratitude, but the kitchen door was closed. Edmund got into the coach and watched the inn recede through the window for longer than the scenery warranted. I did not remark on it. 11 years has taught me when to be quiet. We were halfway to London when he said, "The girl last night." "The one who brought the soup?" "Yes. She managed that drunk as if she'd done it 100 times. She probably has. He was quiet a moment. Then, find out her name. I found out rather more than her name. Within a week I had established that she was Miss Margot Fenwick, niece of the innkeeper's wife, daughter of a Dorset schoolmaster who had died 2 winters before, leaving her no income but excellent Latin. She had been at the Crow and Lantern for 18 months, known in the village as steadfast, capable, and not a great talker. She had turned down a proposal from the blacksmith's elder son, which the village had found baffling, and once corrected the vicar's Greek quotation before the entire congregation, which the village had not. I put this in a letter. Edmund read it twice, which is also something he does not ordinarily do with documents I produce. Then he said, "Write to her." I said, with careful neutrality, "What would you like the letter to say?" He thought for a moment. "That I would like to meet with her, if she is willing, at a time of her choosing and a location she considers suitable. That there is no obligation whatsoever. That she is welcome to disregard the letter entirely if she wishes." I wrote the letter and sealed it with his crest. A ducal letter must be sealed so, though I privately wondered whether the crest might alarm rather than reassure. I sent it with a stable hand I trusted, with instructions to deliver it to Miss Fenwick personally and note her reaction. The stable hand returned and told me her reaction had been to read it very carefully, fold it back along its original creases, and say, "Thank you," in a tone that gave absolutely nothing away. Her reply came 4 days later. It was written in a clean, plain hand on paper that was not expensive but was not cheap either, and it said, without preamble, "I will meet with you. If you intend to come to Fenwick Cross, Tuesday next at 3 would suit. If you would prefer I come to you, I require only that you name the place and give me a week's notice, as I need to arrange for my absence. I do not require an explanation for the meeting in advance, but I should be grateful for one at the meeting itself. Respectfully, M. Fenwick." Edmund read it twice. Then he smiled, which is the expression I see perhaps 4 times in a good year, and said, "Send word that Tuesday at 3 suits very well, and that I will come to Fenwick Cross." He told her, that Tuesday, plain hired coach again, no livery, in the small sitting room that Mrs. Briggs had silently offered them, with herself present as chaperone by the window with her mending, that he had not been able to stop thinking about the evening at the inn. He said he was aware this was an unusual thing to say, and that the circumstances of their acquaintance were not conventional. He said he had made inquiries, being a man who makes inquiries rather than conclusions, and what he had learned had not diminished his interest. He asked whether she might be willing to correspond, with the understanding that she could end the correspondence at any point without explanation. I know all of this because Mrs. Briggs told her sister, who told the butcher's wife, who told the landlord of the next inn along the road, who told my driver, who told me. Margot Fenwick, by all accounts, listened to every word. Then she said, "You are the Duke of Ravenwood." Not a question. A fact she had already located and was simply confirming. He said that he was. She said, "I thought so. You have the look of a man accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves, and you ate my soup without once looking at the bowl." He said, after a moment, that he was not sure how to interpret that. She said, "It means you were not hungry. You were eating the soup because I brought it." That is either very rude or very kind, and I decided at the time it was the latter. Edmund, and I wish with all my heart I had been in that room, Edmund apparently said nothing for a full 10 seconds. Then he said, "I would very much like to write to you, Miss Fenwick." And she said, "I think I would like that too." They corresponded for 3 months. I carried many of the letters myself, and on the 3 occasions Miss Fenwick came to London, chaperoned, staying with a widowed cousin in Marylebone, she and Edmund talked for hours in the drawing-room, and I, in the adjoining study, could hear the quality of the silence between the conversation, not the silence of people filling space, but of 2 people thinking. What the ton made of it, when the ton eventually found out, I cannot fully summarize. There was a good deal of speculation about her unsuitability, her origins, her father's modest position, the fact that she had been serving food in a common room in Dorset. Lady Harcastle said the thing everyone was thinking, at a dinner in February, which was that the Duke of Ravenwood had clearly taken leave of his senses. The Duke of Ravenwood, who was at the same dinner and heard her perfectly well, said, in the quiet tone he uses when he wants a room to fall completely silent, "I have been thinking more clearly in the last 3 months than I have in the last 3 years. I suspect that is Miss Fenwick's influence, and I consider it one of several reasons I intend to ask her to be my wife." The room was, in fact, completely silent. He did ask her. Not at the dinner, he was not performing, he was simply stating facts, but the following week, in his library at Ravenwood House, with no one else present and no ceremony beyond what he clearly felt. He told me afterward that he had sat down opposite her and said, "I find I am not able to think about the future without thinking about you in it. I do not know whether that is something you can accommodate, or whether the circumstances are too complicated, or whether I have moved too quickly. But I would rather ask and be wrong than not ask and always know I didn't." She told him she had been waiting for him to ask since approximately their third letter. He asked what had stopped her from saying so. She said, "You are a duke. I assumed you preferred to lead." He said, "I am going to need you to revise that assumption fairly substantially." She laughed. He told me later it was the best sound he had heard in a room in 11 years, which, I confess, I took slightly personally, and then immediately forgave him for, because he was right. They married in May, at the village church in Fenwick Cross, which was Margot's preference and which Edmund accepted without a single objection, a fact that I believe surprised every person who had ever met him except Margot herself. There were flowers in the churchyard from the village. Mrs. Briggs cried into her best handkerchief. The vicar, it was noted, checked his Greek quotation twice before delivering it. I stood at the back of the church and watched the Duke of Ravenwood stand at the altar and look at the door, and then look at the woman who came through it, plain coat exchanged for ivory silk, her dark hair arranged with a few escaping strands and a single spray of late spring flowers, and I watched his expression do something I had not seen it do in 11 years of service. It went entirely open. Unguarded. The way a man looks when he is somewhere he did not know he was trying to get to and has only just arrived. I have thought about what made it work, in the years since. I have a theory, which I have shared with no one but am happy to share now, which is this: she met him as a hungry stranger in a drafty inn, and she fed him, and she asked him nothing, and that was the thing he could not get past. Every other person in Edmund Vane's life had wanted something from his title, his land, his influence, his power. Margot Fenwick brought him a plate of cold mutton because the kitchen was closed and he looked hungry, and she expected nothing in return. She saw the men before she saw the Duke. And in 11 years of watching him, I had never once seen anyone manage that. She manages it still. She feeds him soup when he is tired and corrects his Greek when he is wrong, and he looks at her across whatever room they are in with that same open, arrived expression, and I think every day of the crow and lantern in November, and the storm, and the candle she set at his elbow without being asked. It was, I have decided, the best plate of cold mutton in the history of Dorset. And I say this as a man who has eaten at rather finer tables.